Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, because my internet is a bit slow. Hmm. 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 Give me a second. Better guys. My link is a bit. Oh. What's wrong with that? Ini yang quizzes lagi agak down. Sebenarnya quizzes kan. Oh, ini jadi kita buka ini aja. Right. One second. Still not loading properly. Okay. While we wait for quizzes to regain to do its maintenance. Yeah. So of course, before we talk about Renaissance, it began with Renaissance. When we talk about the modern philosophy, it is intended to be free. This is the key word. Yeah. Because they've had enough with um, the what is it? They had enough with the church who was controlling knowledge for like almost 1,000 years, maybe around 800 years or so. And uh, they focus on the humanities, especially individual. And Francis Bacon was famously quoted that philosophy needs to be separated from theology. And this also reminds me of Thomas Aquinas, who is a philosopher uh, back in the Middle Age that um, started to combine the teachings of ancient Greek, the philosophy of ancient Greek philosophies with Christianity. Yeah. So there's like a shift. There's like probably that marked the shifting from Middle Age to the Renaissance age. Although John Green said that the Renaissance itself did not was not felt by everyone, even in Italy, because most of the peasants could not exactly feel it because they were illiterate and they were busy with working and being a labor, while the middle and the upper classes were the ones who were probably experiencing the Renaissance. Its peak during the era of René Descartes, the founder of modern philosophy and founder of rationalism. Nah, ini kita habis ini lihat videonya. Nationalism, empiricism, idealism. If we have time, we're going to watch this video as well. But I think what matters the most is this one. Nationalism, empiricism. These both are one package, and this one, neo-parliamentary. Nah, ini kita langsung lihat videonya aja biar lebih gampang dimengerti. So it's easier. But let's take a look at this Renaissance. Let's take a look at this timeline, guys. Renaissance and Age of Reason. Machiavelli published The Prince in 1513. Luther ini maksudnya siapa? Luther ini. Martin Luther ya. Not the Martin Luther King, not the black political figure in the US. No. This is Martin Luther. He was also a priest and a philosopher. Copernicus, where is he from? Copernicus is orang Polandia. He's Polish, but he is a doctor and a lawyer. He's great. I mean, also very bright and multi-talented. Henry IV, Galileo, heliocentric, which means that the universe did not revolve around the Earth, but instead it revolves around the sun. Helio itself means the sun. Helio artinya matahari, ya kan? It's in Latin, and even in Portuguese, in Brazil, they use the word Helio. So that is for name. Yeah. King Charles I execution ended English Civil War in 1649. Ada yang ingat nggak ini? Saya kayaknya pernah bahas sebentar deh. It was only a brief moment when England was not governed by the monarch. Ya. Ada yang ingat nggak? Kalau habis King Charles ini siapa? Who was the ruler after King Charles's era? Ada yang ingat nggak? Nih namanya. Oliver Cromwell. Jadi dia ini he is a civilian. He is I think he's a parliament. Yeah, he's in the parliament, and his title is called the Lord Protector, and he hated the royal family so much that the king was beheaded. The king was beheaded, and ironically, the way he governed the government of England after King Charles's execution, when he ascended to the top of the government, the way he ran the government was also like monarchy. For example, his successor is his son. Jadi ketika Oliver Cromwell meninggal, yang jadi kepala negaranya adalah anaknya, which is sama-sama aja kayak monarki dong. Monarki kan hereditary, ya kan, bukan demokrasi. Tapi kok ini karena demokrasi, tapi kepala negaranya setelahnya si Oliver Cromwell, anaknya juga. Hobbes and Leviathan, ini Carlos Newton, Isaac Newton, Philosophical Questions. Nah ini John Locke. Nah ini Speeding Up the Industrial Revolution. Machiavelli. Machiavelli. The success of a state is most important. Whoever runs the state must try to secure his or her own glory and the success of the state. To do so, he cannot be bound by morality. Jadi intinya harus agak-agak sadis if you want to maintain power, if you want to preserve power, and if you want to be, how do I say it? If you want to hold power, ya, the end justify the means. Jadi kalau hasilnya kamu dapat, maksudnya apa nih? If the result, if you're happy with the result, as in you get the power and you can maintain the power, then all means are necessary. Jadi semua cara itu diperbolehkan menurut dia, menurut Machiavelli. Ya itu dia, agak-agak jahat sih makanya, agak-agak sadis. Sorry. A ruler must have the lion's ferocity to frighten those who want to depose him, and fox's cunning to recognize snares and traps of his enemies. Intinya harus, kalau nggak salah dia pernah bilang, it is better to be feared than to be loved if you cannot have both of them. It is better to be feared than to be loved if you cannot be both of them. So you have to be, you need to be able to pardon everyone because that is easier to do. Kalau dipikir dia benar juga. To be feared is easier than to be loved because if you're loved, then you will have other obligations. People will expect from you. People will expect things from you, if you know what I mean. And you will also need to be able to have fox's cunning to recognize snares and traps of his enemies. Nah, ini ada modernism. Nah ini justru nanti deh pelan-pelan. Coba. Let me check if quizzes. Udah bisa nih. Just speed down. I think. Nah ini guys, coba kita pakai yang lesson nih. Click on the link. Halo. Bisa join nggak? Hello. Can you guys hear me? I think I need one of you to turn on your camera. Oh. Nggak bisa join ya, Raymond ya?
Bisa, sir.
Bisa. Nah, coba gua restart dulu. Oh, gitu. Maksudnya. So you guys have joined. Raymond udah join ya?
Udah join, sir.
Udah. That's weird.
Cuman yang buat aneh ini nggak ada yang masuk gitu.
Oh ini ada nih. Ya ampun masih ya tetap ya. Ini pasti Adit nih.
Wait.
atau siapa nih? ini udah ada yang muncul kok. Tomanesco, Biggest. Oh lagi down mereka. Lagi agak down makanya. No wonder. Ini udah 4 nih. Okay, I'll be right back. Oke, yuk. Nah, coba refresh lagi deh. Nah, yuk. Oke. Nah, Renaissance, rebirth, etc. is appropriate because the Black Plague effectively ended life as it had been structured during the Middle Ages. Those that survived the viral disease were left to put the pieces of a world destroyed back together again. Great changes and new understandings would usher in a period of creativity and exploration. Nah, itu ada pertanyaannya kayaknya. Yes. Ya, rebirth ya. Lihat. Before the plague, before the plague, under the feudal system, peasants worked for nobility, for basically food and shelter, and they became the serfs, istilahnya serf, SERF. Conditions were often very poor, and there was no room for upward mobility. Jadi nggak mungkin bisa naik kelas, ibaratnya nggak mungkin bisa, you know what I mean, to be the middle class if they were peasants. After the plague, because there were so few peasants left, they were able to negotiate for wages and under better living conditions. Karena makin sedikit peasantsnya, jadinya they were able to get better salary, and other better living conditions. This effectively ended the feudal system in Europe. Women's roles greatly improved after the plague as well. Previously, a woman was ruled by her husband, and the noble lord in charge, but because the plague wiped out so many men, women were able to own property and work in areas that they were previously not allowed. Questions, guys? Ini Apple Link kayaknya disconnected nih atau bad network. 3, 2, 1. There weren't enough peasants to negotiate. Sorry, to work, so they could negotiate better arrangements. Pre-plague advancements in medicine were hindered by two things. The fact that most medical books were written in Arabic, so only a few could read them, and church. After the plague, people's trust and faith in the church's guidance was greatly diminished. Doctors realized their knowledge of cures and diseases was vastly limited, as nothing they did work for the plague victims. As a result, the doctors began to study the body and medicines and write about their findings in languages that everyone could understand. The hospitals began to develop as places where people people could actually be treated instead of holding locations for the sick. Question lagi nih kayaknya. Yes, doctors realized how little they actually knew. Renaissance period saw an explosion in the arts, from theater to painting, sculpture, and music. Artists wanted to bring a more realistic feel to the artwork they produced. This period saw a resurgence in theater and new forms of performance, including opera and commedia dell'arte, a type of improvised physical comedy. Theaters were built to accommodate the performances, and included enhancements to the stage such as a proscenium arch, which gives the illusion of a frame around the stage, and also perspective staging to give the illusion of distance. Oh, keren juga ya. Oke, let's go. Terus lagi. Yes, improvisation and comedy. William Shakespeare lived during the later part of the Renaissance, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Shakespeare's plays focus on creating human characters and with psychological capacity. His stories appeal to the wealthy and the common alike because he wrote about characters from all social standing. He was so popular that even the Queen often came to see his plays. Okay. Until 1660, only men were allowed to perform on stage. Actors during this time did not only need to know how to act, but they also had to dance, sing, play instruments, and dance. Scenery was not often used on stage except for objects required by the plot. However, costumes were often very elaborate and usually were the costliest part of a production. Jadi yang paling mahal kostumnya di produksinya. Actors during this time were responsible for providing their own costumes and makeup. Wih, mahal juga ya. Jadi nggak didanain oleh teaternya. Harus ini sendiri, provide sendiri. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. These characters were interesting and cross social classes. Yes, okay. Ini quiz lagi ya guys, soal Renaissance. Ini kalau ini yang nggak pakai lesson langsung, jadi you guys can do it for yourself. Nah ini ya. Jadi agak-agak ini kayaknya servernya tulisnya. English. I'm going to do the countdown from 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Changus, Clara, and Eponine. Yes, art and learning. The advancements, the rebirth of science intinya. Yes. Nah, ini tadi aku bilang kan, lokasinya. To its classical civilization and trade with other civilizations. Karena mereka banyak trading sama the Ottomans, the Turks, Turkey. How did the increase of trade on the Italian peninsula lead to the Renaissance? Increased wealth allowed the wealthy to invest in arts. Yeah. What was the chief source of Florence? Iya, ini kan banking. Karena kan si ini, si Medici kan, yang orang bank, aku lupa bilang ya, sorry. Jadi si Lorenzo, keluarga Medici ini keluarga bankir semua, orang bank, satu keluarga. Dan ya itu. Because of this, so not architecture, not sea trade, not textiles, but is banking. Mungkin tahu jawabannya si Nadia nih yang tahu ya. Apa Nadia salah juga lagi Nadia? Jangan-jangan. Nah, kamu salah bener nih Nat?
I choose the wrong answer. I choose
Gimana? Kan kamu main game ya. Aduh. It's okay. It's cool though. Which family helped fund the arts in Italy? Medici. Oh, Machiavelli itu dia political theorist and realist political theorist kayak kali ya. Soalnya dia sangat jujur. Dia harus sadis kalau mau berkuasa dan punya maintain power. Reflects human, yes, individuals are important and reason is the path and knowledge. No, justru kebalik, karena buat mereka religion itu nggak terlalu penting, science yang lebih penting. Nggak ada division kok, nggak ada division. Maintaining nature, no, it's not about the nature, it's about science and art. Yes, Greece and Rome. Secular, focus more on this world, betul. Enggak, ini paling enggak justru, soalnya mereka malah makin enggak religius. Although some of the artists painted Madonna, bukan Madonna penyanyi ya, maksud gue adalah Madonna Mary ya. Ya, you know what I mean. Buddha Maria, nah itu. What is a distinctive aspect of ancient Greek art that was imitated during the Renaissance? Realistic representations of the human form, ya kan? Yang patung-patung putih-putih itu, yang dicat putih semua. Nah ini yang gue tadi bilang kan, how did Thomas Aquinas have a lasting impact on the Catholic Church in the 13th century? He helped combine Christian teachings with Greek philosophy. Leonardo, apa nih? Bukan, hati-hati. Ini TMNT ya, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Meskipun emang nama-nama artis semua, ini nama-nama painter semua. Which Renaissance artist is known for the Sistine Chapel? Michelangelo. Ya. Kalau Leonardo da Vinci itu kan Mona Lisa, The Vitruvian Man, The Last Supper, sama Salvator Mundi. Salvator Mundi itu lukisannya Jesus Christ yang pakai baju Renaissance. Tangannya yang ini begini kayak bikin cross, yang ini megang transparent orb. Jadi kayak ada bola yang transparan gitu, dan ada light di dalamnya. Itu tentang pencerahan atau tentang knowledge gitu. Dan itu dilelang mahal banget. In art, the way of showing people and things as they appear at different distances is called perspective. How did Leonardo da Vinci minimize the distinction between art and science? Yes, he drew intricate anatomical drawings of humans and nature specimens. Nah, ini emang nggak terlalu banyak yang tahu. Dan ini keren banget nih guys. In art, the use of light and shadow to separate objects is called. Kopi. Ini keren nih guys. Lihat. Keren ya. Light and dark. Ya nggak sih? Keren ya. Chiaroscuro lighting in photography. Nah, mungkin kalau kalian foto-foto bisa kayak gini nih, keren. Keren. Banyak darkness aspeknya. Maksud ini ya. Bukan juga. Oh, ini dia. How did William Shakespeare? Okay, yes, he wrote many popular plays. And that's it. Berikutnya kita akan nonton video tentang empiricism and rationalism. Okay. Empiricism and okay. Right. Locke, Berkeley, and empiricism and rationalism.
Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
By the time we're done today, I just might have you questioning whether this apple is real or not. Think I can't do it?
Complex, guys, but try to keep up with Hank. Yeah, it's a bit hard to understand because it's very philosophical, but it's try to challenge your mind to follow the idea as much as possible. Okay, so try to maintain focus and concentration in this video.
Do it. Give me about 10 minutes. I might have you wondering whether I'm a physical object or not. And the same goes for all this stuff. And for your computer, and Nick behind the camera, and you. How? By unleashing the power of empiricism. Last time, we learned about 17th century philosopher René Descartes and how he upended the apple basket that was his entire personal belief system and descended into a radical skepticism, only to emerge with his conviction that cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This one idea, the fact that he was thinking, or really the fact that he was doubting, allowed him to build back up, one by one, more beliefs that he thought he could rely on. But in the end, most of the beliefs that Descartes ended up putting back into his intellectual apple basket had to do with the immaterial world. Like, he decided that he could believe that he existed as a thinking thing, and he believed that God existed. Ultimately, he lit upon the idea that some of our thoughts are clear and distinct in a way that somehow guarantees their truth. But a lot of philosophers disagreed. They argued that thinking on its own wasn't enough. Like, just because you're thinking doesn't mean that your thoughts correspond to material, reliable way. Basically, Descartes' philosophical opponents thought that the cogito was a dead end. So here we start to see a split between two different understandings of how we can most reliably get to the nature of reality, and therefore truth. Both were responses to the constant questioning that is skepticism. On the one hand, there was rationalism, and on the other, empiricism. Descartes, like Plato before him, was a lover of reason. He met skepticism with rationalism. He believed that the most real things in life were ideas, propositions that can be known through pure reason. Deductive truths, which we talked about before, fall into this category, and mathematical truths do too. But by contrast, empiricism is based on the principle that the most reliable source of knowledge isn't our ideas or our reasoning, but our senses. Sure, we can know things through deduction and basic logic, but what actually leads us to truth, or at least gives us our best shot at getting there, are things like induction and the scientific method, ways of thinking that tell us about the material world. Probably the most famous split among philosophers between these two camps was the lifelong debate between Plato and Aristotle. Plato was convinced that truth resided in the immaterial world of ideas, while Aristotle's attention was focused firmly on the ground. But what about in Descartes' day? If he was the original prototype of the navel-gazing philosopher, a living example of rationalist thinking, then his foil was the 17th century English thinker John Locke. This is where he was born. Locke believed that we are all born as tabula rasa, or a blank slate. He argued that all knowledge is obtained through experience. He rejected the concept of innate ideas, the view that we're born preloaded with certain information, like what's good versus what's bad, or what is the nature of God. Locke thought that we are born knowing nothing, and instead all of our knowledge comes to us through sense data. But one place where Locke agreed with Descartes was in the idea that just because your senses tell you something, that doesn't mean you can trust it. After all, sometimes your senses give you false information, like when you think you see or hear something that's just not there. Descartes' response to this, of course, was to just throw out all sense experience as an unreliable source of knowledge. But Locke didn't go that far. Instead, in order to figure out whether the senses accurately reflect the outside world, he introduced a distinction between what he called the primary and secondary qualities of all things. Primary qualities are qualities that physical objects themselves have. They're not in our minds, Locke argued. They're actually in the stuff. These primary qualities include things like solidity, the density, weight, and mass of an object, and also extension, the height, depth, and width that a certain thing has. He also included figure, or the shape of an object, as well as mobility, which is this, whether it's stationary or in motion. So primary qualities, Locke said, belong to the thing itself. Take this apple. It weighs maybe 150 grams, it's the size of my palm, roundish but firm with the slightest bit of give, and right now it's moving through the air. Those are its primary qualities. But it has secondary qualities too. By Locke's standards, they are not real, at least not in the objective, agreed-upon way. They're just in our minds, but they get there through the primary qualities. I'm talking about things like its color, taste, texture, smell, and sound. The secondary qualities of this apple are its redness, how it tastes and smells and feels on my tongue and hand, even how it sounds when I bite into it.
Primary qualities-nya itu yang the reason, ya. Secondary qualities-nya itu yang senses.
Locke believed that the distinction between primary and secondary qualities explained the disagreements that we all have about our perceptions of the outside world. Like, we could measure this apple in a bunch of different ways and all agree on its primary qualities, but its secondary qualities would no doubt lead to some disputes. Like, is it really red? What kind of red exactly? Cardinal red or carmine red? It's kind of dark purple at the top, or is it just like a dark pink? What about the sound it made? Would I call that crunchy or crispy? Or I don't like that bitey? It's like apple sound. We could argue about that kind of stuff till the cows came home. But if we disagree about its primary qualities, one of us is simply wrong, because primary qualities have nothing to do with you or me. Instead, they have everything to do with the object itself. Locke's reasoning was simple, even elegant, extracting a lot of explanatory power out of very few basic concepts. As a result, it resonated with a lot of people, and one person it resonated strongly with was the Irish philosopher George Berkeley. He was moved by Locke's empiricism and took it seriously, so seriously in fact that he ended up using Locke's own logic against him. He basically took empiricism to its logical conclusion, dismantling the whole process of perception to the point that he had to wonder whether anything existed at all. Berkeley began by taking apart the distinction that Locke made between primary and secondary qualities. Like, think about this apple again. How do you know its shape? Locke said the apple's shape as a primary quality is immediately perceivable. But Berkeley pointed out that you don't perceive some qualities of an object while totally disregarding others. Like, you can't detect an apple's shape without first, or at least also, detecting its color. When you think about it, you can't detect any of the primary qualities without also considering the secondary ones. You can't see a colorless apple. You can't feel a textureless apple. In fact, if you try to strip away the apple's secondary qualities in an effort to get at the primary ones, you end up with no apple at all. Try it. Close your eyes and imagine an apple made of only primary qualities. So it has a certain shape, a certain size, but it doesn't have any color or texture or taste. You can't do it. You try to imagine it with no color, but really you're probably imagining one that's either black or white or transparent, the color of what's behind it. And if you try to imagine it as having no texture, you'll find that there's still texture there. It's just smooth. Remember, Locke asserted that secondary qualities are not objectively real. They can only be subjectively perceived. But now, Berkeley has shown that the two are inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other, which means that the primary qualities can't be real either. They too are just what your mind makes of things. So this led Berkeley to a startling conclusion. There's just no such thing as matter. There can't be. Instead, there's only perceptions. Berkeley's famous assertion, his version of cogito ergo sum, was esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. In his opinion, there are no objects, only perceivers. And even then, the perceivers themselves don't really have any physical form. They're just disembodied minds, perceiving things that aren't really there. A little bit terrifying when you start thinking about it. In Berkeley's scenario, we're all set adrift in a world of nothing but thought. What's scary about this is that if everything's just perception, then when the perception goes away, there can't be anything left. So please, for the love of Pete, do not turn away from your computer. If you stop perceiving me, I stop existing. But what if maybe you don't care about me? Still, you'd better not go to sleep, because as soon as you do, you'll cease to exist, because you won't be able to perceive yourself. The only guarantee that you'll continue to exist in your sleep is to have a friend watch you when you're sleeping, which probably is a non-starter for a number of reasons. But in any case, the second your friend blinks, you're gone. So in the end, Berkeley believed that there was only one thing that kept us and everything else from disappearing into oblivion: God. Berkeley believed that God was the ultimate perceiver. God is always watching with unblinking perception that holds objects in existence even when we're not paying attention. The tough thing about Berkeley is, we all pretty much think he has to be wrong. Very few of us are willing to give up our belief in the physical world, no matter who's watching. We are sensory animals. We really need this apple to exist. Next time, we're going to take a side journey into the world of knowledge, and then in episode 8, we'll see if Karl Popper can manage to get the physical world back for us. Today, then in episode 8, we'll see.
His theory is about, in English, it is called falsification or falsibility, but we'll get into it later. Okay, what's next? Nah, ini menarik. We need to talk about apa dulu ya enaknya? Season charging dulu apa Karl Marx dulu ya? Because we're now touching the concept of modern philosophy, or the era of modern philosophy. So let's start with ini dulu aja deh. Capitalism and socialism dulu aja. Maybe we can just play it for a while.
Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about capitalism. Yeah, Mr. Green, capitalism just turns men into wolves. Your purportedly free markets only make slaves of us all. Oh God, Stan, it's me from college. Me from the past has become me from college. This is a disaster. The reason he's so unbearable, Stan, is that he refuses to recognize the legitimacy of other people's narratives, and that means that he will never, ever be able to have a productive conversation with another human in his entire life. So listen, me from the past, I'm going to disappoint you by being too capitalist, and I'm going to disappoint a lot of other people by not being capitalist enough, and I'm going to disappoint the historians by not using enough jargon. But what can I do? We only have 12 minutes. Fortunately, capitalism is all about efficiency, so let's do this, me from college. Randy Riggs becomes a best-selling author. Josh Radnor stars in a great sitcom. It is not going to work out with Emily, and do not go to Alaska with a girl you've known for 10 days. Okay, let's talk capitalism. So capitalism is an economic system, but it's also a cultural system. It's characterized by innovation and investment to increase wealth. But today we're going to focus on production and how industrial capitalism changed it. Stan, I can't wear these emblems of the bourgeoisie while Karl Marx himself is looking at me. It's ridiculous. I'm changing. Very hard to take off a shirt dramatically. So let's say it's 1200 CE and you're a rug merchant. Just like merchants today, you sometimes need to borrow money in order to buy the rugs you want to resell at a profit, and then you pay that money back, often with interest, once you've resold the rugs. This is called mercantile capitalism, and it was a global phenomenon, from the Chinese to the Indian Ocean Trade Network to Muslim merchants who would sponsor trade caravans across the Sahara. But by the 17th century, merchants in the Netherlands and in Britain had expanded upon this idea to create joint stock companies. Those companies could finance bigger trade missions and also spread the risk of international trade. But the thing about international trade is sometimes boats sink or they get taken by pirates, and while that's bad if you're a sailor because, you lose your life, it's really bad if you're a mercantile capitalist because you lost all your money. But if you own 1/10 of 10 boats, your risk is much better managed. That kind of investment definitely increased wealth, but it only affected a sliver of the population, and it didn't create a culture of capitalism. Industrial capitalism was something altogether different, both in scale and in practice. Let's use Joyce Appleby's definition of industrial capitalism: an economic system that relies on investment of capital in machines and technology that are used to increase production of marketable goods. So imagine that someone made a Stan machine. By the way, Stan, this is a remarkable likeness. And that Stan machine could produce and direct 10 times more episodes of Crash Course than a human Stan. Well, of course, even if there are significant upfront costs, I'm going to invest in a Stan machine so I can start cranking out 10 times the knowledge. Stan, are you focusing on the robot instead of me? I am the star of the show! Stan, but you're going behind the globe. So when most of us think about capitalism, especially when we think about its downsides, long hours, low wages, miserable working conditions, child labor, unemployed Stans, that's what we're thinking about. Now, admittedly, this is just one definition of industrial capitalism among many, but it's the definition we're going with. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. Industrial capitalism developed first in Britain in the 19th century. Britain had a bunch of advantages. It was the dominant power on the seas, and it was making good money off of trade with its colonies, including the slave trade. Also, the growth of capitalism was helped by the half-century of civil unrest that resulted from the 17th century English Civil War. Now, I'm not advocating for civil wars or anything, but in this particular case, it was useful because before the war, the British Crown had put a lot of regulations on the economy, complicated licenses, royal monopolies, etc. But during the turmoil, it couldn't enforce them, which made for freer markets. Another factor was a remarkable increase in agricultural productivity in the 16th century. As food prices started to rise, it became profitable for farmers, both large and small, to invest in agricultural technologies that would improve crop yields. Those higher prices for grain probably resulted from population growth, which in turn was encouraged by increased production of food crops. A number of these agricultural improvements came from the Dutch, who had chronic problems feeding themselves and discovered that planting different kinds of crops, like clover that added nitrogen to the soil and could be used to feed livestock at the same time, meant that more fields could be used at once. This increased productivity eventually brought down prices, and this encouraged further innovation in order to increase yield to make up for the drop in prices. Lower food prices had an added benefit. Since food cost less and wages in England remained high, workers would have more disposable income, which meant that if there were consumer goods available, they would be consumed, which incentivized people to make consumer goods more efficiently and therefore more cheaply. You can see how this positive feedback loop leads to more food and more stuff, culminating in a world where people have so much stuff that we must rent space to store it, and so much food that obesity has become a bigger killer than starvation. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So this increased food that obesity has become a bigger killer than starvation. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So this increased productivity also meant that fewer people needed to work in agriculture in order to feed the population. To put this in perspective, in 1520, 80% of the English population worked the land. By 1800, only 36% of adult male laborers were working in agriculture, and by 1850, that percentage had dropped to 25. This meant that when the factories started humming, there were plenty of workers to hum along with them, especially child laborers. So far, all this sounds pretty good, right? I mean, except for the child labor. Who wouldn't want more cheaper food? Yeah, well, not so fast. One of the ways the British achieved all this agricultural productivity was through the process of enclosure, whereby landlords would reclaim and privatize fields that for centuries had been held in common by multiple tenants. This increased agricultural productivity, but it also impoverished many tenant farmers, many of whom lost their livelihoods. Okay, for our purposes, capitalism is also a cultural system rooted in the need of private investors to turn a profit. So the real change needed here was a change of mind. People had to develop the capitalist values of taking risks risks and appreciating innovation. And they had to come to believe that making an upfront investment in something like a stand machine could pay for itself and then some. One of the reasons that these values developed in Britain was that the people who initially held them were really good at publicizing them. Writers like Thomas Munn, who worked for the English East India Company, exposed people to the idea that the economy was controlled by markets, and other writers popularized the idea that it was human nature for individuals to participate in markets as rational actors.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, kenapa itu enggak? Jaringannya enggak.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash. Our purpose is capitalism is also a culture of self and then some. One of the reasons that these values developed in Britain was that the people who initially held them were really good at publicizing them. Writers like Thomas Munn, who worked for the English East India Company, exposed people to the idea that the economy was controlled by markets, and other writers popularized the idea that it was human nature for individuals to participate in markets as rational actors. Even our language changed. The word individuals did not apply to persons until the 7th.
Bad network, I think. Samurai and necessary. Okay.
Hi, I'm John Green. Well as producers, and that this was actually a good thing because the desire to consume manufactured goods could spur economic growth. The main spur to trade, or rather to industry and ingenuity, is the exorbitant appetite of men, which they will take pain to.
I think I'm having a bad connection. I think ini aja. Our time is almost up anyway. So I'm just going to send you guys the links. This one is about capitalism and socialism. You should check it out by yourself. In the meantime, let's try watching this Nietzsche. Mungkin yang Nietzsche bisa lebih diakses. Okay, this one is about Friedrich Nietzsche.
Sound like ni, the second like cha, Nietzsche. Then we need to get past some of his extraordinary and provocative statements. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. God is dead, and we have killed him. And what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. God is dead, and we have killed him.
Nah, ini konteksnya lebih ke horror ya, bukan horror jump scare gitu kayak film horror, tapi more like a sense of, it's not a sense of joy, more like a sense of regret. Yeah, it's more like a sense of regret.
And his large moustache. But when we do, we'll discover a thinker who's intermittently enchanting, wise, and very helpful. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 in a quiet village in the eastern part of Germany, where his father was the priest. He did exceptionally well at school and university, and so excelled at ancient Greek that he was made a professor at the University of Basel when still only in his mid-20s. But his official career didn't work out. He got fed up with his fellow academics, gave up his job, and moved to Sils Maria in the Swiss Alps, where he lived quietly, working on his masterpieces, among them The Birth of Tragedy, Human All Too Human, The Gay Science, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morals. He had lots of problems. He didn't get on with his family. I don't like my mother, and it's painful even for me to hear my sister's voice. Women kept rejecting him, his books didn't sell, and when he was only 44, he had a mental breakdown, precipitated when he saw a horse in a Turin street being beaten by its driver, and ran over to embrace him, shouting, "I understand you." He never recovered, and died 11 sad years later. But his philosophy was full of heroism and grandeur. He was a prophet of what he called Selbstüberwindung, or self-overcoming, the process by which a great-souled person, what he called an Übermensch, rises above their circumstances and difficulties to embrace whatever life throws at them. He wanted his work to teach us, as he put it, how to become who we really are. His thought centers around 4 main recommendations. 1. Own up to envy. Envy is, Nietzsche recognized, a big part of life. Yet the lingering effects of Christianity generally teach us to feel ashamed of our envious feelings. They seem an indication of evil, so we hide them from ourselves and others. Yet there's nothing wrong with envy, maintained Nietzsche, so long as we use it as a guide to what we really want. Every person who makes us envious should be seen as an indication of what we could one day become. The envy-inducing writer, tycoon, or chef is hinting at who you are capable of one day being. It's not that Nietzsche believed we always end up getting what we want. His own life had taught him this well enough. He simply insisted that we must face up to our true desires, put up a heroic fight to honour them, and only then mourn failure with solemn dignity. That is what it means to be an Übermensch. 2. Don't be a Christian. Nietzsche had some extreme things to say about Christianity. In the entire New Testament, he wrote, there is only one person worth respecting, Pilate, the Roman governor. It was knockabout stuff, but his true target was more subtle and more interesting. He resented Christianity for protecting people from their envy. Christianity had, in Nietzsche's account, emerged in the late Roman Empire, in the minds of timid slaves who'd lacked the stomach to get hold of what they really wanted, and so had clung to a philosophy that made a virtue of their cowardice. He called this Sklavenmoral. Christians, whom he rather rudely termed die Herde, the herd, had wished to enjoy the real ingredients of fulfillment, a position in the world, sex, intellectual mastery, creativity, but they'd been too inept to get them. They'd therefore fashioned a hypocritical creed, denouncing what they wanted but were too weak to fight for, while praising what they didn't want but happened to have. So, in the Christian value system, sexlessness turned into purity, weakness became goodness, submission to people one hates became obedience, and, in Nietzsche's phrase, not being able to take revenge turned into forgiveness. Christianity amounted to a giant machine for bitter denial. 3. Never drink alcohol. Nietzsche himself drank only water, and as a special treat, milk, and he thought we should do likewise. He wasn't making a small, eccentric dietary point. The idea went to the heart of his philosophy, as contained in his declaration, there have been 2 great narcotics in European civilization, Christianity and alcohol. He hated alcohol for the very same reasons that he scorned Christianity, because both numb pain, both reassure us that things are just fine as they are, sapping us of the will to change our lives for the better. A few drinks usher in a transient feeling of satisfaction that can get fatally in the way of taking the steps necessary to improve our lives. Nietzsche was obsessed with the awkward truth that getting really valuable things done hurts. How little you know of human happiness, you comfortable people, he wrote. The secret of a fulfilled life is live dangerously, build your cities on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. 4. God is dead. Nietzsche's dramatic assertion that God is dead is not, as it's often
I
taken
think this one is the most important, guys. So let's take a look at this.
to be. Nietzsche's dramatic assertion that God is dead is not, as it's often taken to be,
Sorry, not the most important, more like the most famous quote of his.
some kind of a celebratory statement.
Sorry, sebentar lagi deh, biar nggak hilang konteks.
Is dead is not, as it's often taken to be, some kind of a celebratory statement. Despite his reservations about Christianity, Nietzsche didn't think that the end of belief was anything to cheer about. Religious beliefs were false, he knew, but he observed that they were very, very beneficial in the sense of helping us cope with the problems of life. Nietzsche felt that the gap left by religion should ideally be filled by culture. He meant philosophy, art, music, literature. Culture should replace scripture. However, Nietzsche was deeply suspicious of the way his own era was handling culture. He believed the universities were killing the humanities, turning them into dry academic exercises, rather than using them for what they were always meant to be.
By the way, I hope that I'm not making you guys turn into this dry academic exercises.
Them into dry academic exercises, rather than using them for what they were always meant to be, guides to life.
Yes.
He admired the way
So
the
that's
Greek
why pursue your life, you guys. Pursue what you want to be, pursue your hobby, your passion, everything.
Greeks had used tragic drama in a practical, therapeutic way as an occasion for catharsis and moral education, and wished his own age to be comparably ambitious. He called for a reformation in which people, newly conscious of the crisis brought on by the end of faith, would fill the gaps created by the disappearance of religion with philosophy and art. Every era faces particular psychological challenges, thought Nietzsche, and it's the task of the philosopher to identify and help solve these. For Nietzsche, the 19th century was reeling under the impact of two developments, mass democracy and atheism. The first threatened to unleash torrents of undigested envy, the second to leave humans without guidance or morality. In relation to both challenges, Nietzsche remains our endearing, fascinating, often lovable, and mustachioed guide.
All right. So, like I said before in the beginning of the class, and let me just send you guys the links that you got. Links to the videos that you need to check by yourself. Ini satu Marx political theory. Ini deh, essentialism. So just watch the videos by yourself, not as a requirement for exams. No, don't worry. It's just something that you guys need to know about, and it's just something that will be enlightening to all of us and to all of you, especially those who are not aware of these topics or subjects. Okay, so I guess that's it for today. Let me check the session log before we call it a day. By the way, I've just started playing this game. It's free on Precision Network. It's called The Surge. Oh. Ada yang main nggak? The Surge. It's free and they have the sequel. It's like Dark Souls kind of series. Dark Souls-like game. Souls-like game kayak Sekiro, Nioh, that kind of stuff, where you die easily. Which itself can be philosophically analyzed, if you know what I mean, right? It can be analyzed philosophically, that if you keep persevering, if you keep reviving yourself, and getting better at it, then you will prevail in life, hopefully, at least. Ada yang main ya, gue doang ya. Okay. How are you guys doing? Sayed, Adit, Raymond, you just turn on your cameras. Good. Yay. Yay. Aduh, dan minus main lagi lama. Momen paling deg-degan. First world problem. Lemot. Refresh. Close to the Do si do re, la fa re do re mi, do mi sol, la sol fa si do la sol fa mi re do. Cek lah. Apa sih Sar? Ya gitu deh. Oh my god. Oh anyway guys, ini lemot parah nih, mungkin lagi down kali Bimanya. So ntar gue coba urus sendiri deh. Doakan saya ya. Gambate. Gambate tumisan. Okay. So this is our last meeting. Next is the midterm test. What I can say about the midterm test is because I'm not the one who composed or made the test. So what advice can I give to you guys is that probably the real challenge is in doing the test for the midterm test for the subject is to understand the questions or not to understand to understand the questions and to do a research about some of the topics. So just feel free to use as many sources to for you guys. Dia lagi di mana itu Bila? Lagi di cafe ya? I saw your video turn on for a while. Tadi gue ngomong apa ya? Yeah, so the real challenge is to understand on how to answer the questions, yeah, for the midterm test. So yeah, just feel free to improve your knowledge by watching YouTube videos, by watching YouTube videos or reading articles. Basically, any means necessary so that you will be able to understand on how to answer the question and to get the right or to get the best answers. Okay, is that understood? All right, so I think that's all for today. Thank you guys for joining. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed today's class. I'll see you after the midterm test. Okay. Ciao. Bye bye. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Ciao. Bye bye. Take care, everyone.